was in line to be the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who was on the short list to be the director of the CIA, who was caught red-handed, busted, for making a corrupt deal with an agent of the Israeli government to basically try to, in a sense, blackmail or extort, I guess is more like it, Nancy Pelosi into getting her that seat as chair of the House Intelligence Committee. And, the whole way it was done was by, we threatened to withhold all California Jewish money from the Democratic Party unless you don't get this done. And the effort was to be headed up by Haim Saban. And the whole thing was not just busted open by the excellent, nobody ever questions his credentials or authoritative voice on national security issues, the great journalist Jeff Stein, who's now at the Washington Post himself, who then was at Congressional Quarterly. But it was all verified and followed up and expanded on by the New York Times and the Washington Post. Both ran one story, developing the story a little bit, and then away it went. And Jane Harman is still sitting in the House of Representatives, and I don't know, how she stands in her in the current primary telephone polls or whatever leading up to her primary against Marcy Winograd, but the normal state of things is to be expected. She's going to go back to the House of Representatives as though none of this ever happened. She challenged Jeff Stein to a fund run, and the whole thing went away.
Yeah, it just shows. I mean, I ended my article saying that these things are not even investigated, much less prosecuted, because everyone's gotten the memo by now. And that memo reads, you absolutely cannot use our criminal justice system or any legal system to go after these abuses. And speaking of that race, there's a great article by Jeffrey Blankford called The Last Democratic Primary Worth Watching, because what you say, that race will determine if, in fact, Winograd can even get her message out, whether, the American people are willing to vote for somebody who's honest versus somebody who's working for a foreign government on important matters. So,
me, I'm a libertarian, and I'm against everything, whatever it is, I'm against it, and whatever Marcy Winograd's positions on various issues are, they don't necessarily have anything to do with me, but anyone can look at those two women, just glance at the two of them. One of them is clearly a villain, and the other is a sweet lady. You know what I mean? There's just no question about that. Nancy Harman is a mean old witch, and Marcy Winograd is not. And, never mind even the details. That's how Americans choose these things, is like it's an American Idol contest. Well, if that's so, then Marcy Winograd ought to do great. Because that Jane Harman is just, the worst.
Well, it just gets back into the nature of politics. I mean, again, going back to Abraham Feinberg, the reason he was so valuable to the Israeli nuclear program was that he was just at the heart of Democratic Party fundraising. I'm sure there's a Republican equivalent, but, that's not the way our politics should be run. George Washington never imagined it to be that way, I'm sure. But, getting back
Well, he did imagine it, and he warned specifically against it. He said, this is exactly what will happen to you. Let me describe it. And then he went on in detail in his farewell address. Once you put your interests and intertwine them all with those of a foreign power, this is what will happen to you. And he, might as well have gone ahead and described the Jane Harman incident word for word there.
Yeah, pretty much. And, this is it. This is the job for Americans. Americans who are troubled by this whole drive to get Iran. I mean, Michael Schroyer wrote an intro to my last book, and he quoted Lincoln saying, if destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. And that's what's happening. I mean, as a nation of free men, we can either, and women, decide that, the Jane Harmans of the world and the Haim Sabans, that they're the ones who should really be running things, or that other people who aren't doing that sort of thing should be in charge and, pull the right levers in the voting booth, insist that the attorneys, the district attorneys, go after violations. I mean, in the last election, Haim Saban was offering $1 million to electors to throw their vote to Hillary Clinton. I mean, that's clearly a major election violation. The people who were asked to do that made loud noises about how improper that was. What happened? Nothing.
Well, of course, if he'd been Chinese, people would have flipped out, right? It's no different,
think of
really,
his,
than...
last name were Abu Haj.
You're right, yeah. Or Riyadi.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, these are the Chinese, that Lippo Bank, which is basically a half partnership between the Riyadi family and the People's Liberation Army. They paid for 3 elections of Bill Clinton's, his second governor's race, or his third, maybe it was 4, 2 governor's races and 2 presidential races, bankrolled by the Chinese. And finally, at least, that caught on because they look different than us, I guess, or different enough that people were able to make hay about it. But it's really no different in kind than what's going on here.
And we shouldn't care. We should care about the corruption. And, the point here is the corruption is coming from this lobby right now, and it's pervasive, it's dangerous, it's misdirecting our national wealth. People really have to take note. Otherwise, as Bush said one time during the financial crisis, this sucker could go down.
Yep. And you know what always confused me, too? The Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I mean, I was too old by the time that thing came out, but I think even if I had been 8, I would have thought that was cheesy and stupid.
Well, you're onto something there as well. The idea, again, that Haim Saban can put, $13 million into the Brookings Institution and bring in his guy, Martin Indyk, to tell us about progressive policy, and that he can also put an almost equal amount into the Democratic National Committee to influence the Clinton administration and get his people into government. I mean, we should be somewhat suspicious and say, where is this money coming from? Because in the case of Feinberg, he would be moving hundreds of thousands of dollars around while the Israeli government would be giving him concessions. And we see kind of that same thing happening in the case of Nozetti, it's alleged, and his indictments. We see it in the same case with other people who have business interests overseas, and there's no apparent foreign agency connection. Yet, when you see the cash flow, you say, oh, I see, they're a foreign agent, this is a foreign influence. Whoever they're working for, it's not the American people, so we should shut it down. So I have a real problem with the way some of these financial arrangements are made, because what I've seen over the years is that the foreign agent registration section of the DOJ has been pretty much shut down. They can't take on this stuff. They've been beaten to a pulp, and they're not protecting the American people anymore. So
yeah, that's the thing about slippery slopes. You end up at the bottom of it, where the FBI ain't even trying anymore.
Nope.
Great.
Nope.
Yeah. Well, so much for them anyway. All right, well, listen.
It'd be nice if they did something good.
Yeah, no, seriously, I think if we abolished the FBI and just turned it over to the state police departments, they'd do better if it came down to it, Well, I prefer the Texas Rangers, Anyway, all right. Listen, I really appreciate your time as always, Grant. Great work.
Thanks for having me on. Anytime.
All right, y'all, that is Grant F. Smith from the Institute for Research, Middle East Policy. That's IRMEP, I-R-M-E-P, IRMEP.org. He's the author of Spy Trade, Foreign Agents, Deadly Dogma, America's Defense Line, Visa Denied, and I guess that's it. All right, Anti-War Radio.